I always say I love when you guys ask questions. Well, today I'm going to answer a viewer question right off YouTube. Is driving all right? We'll look at that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there once again, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. As always, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You too can ask a question, and it may end up as an episode. In fact, if it's really good, we may even discuss it online, record it live, and present the whole thing up here. Love to try that. Today, I'm answering a question from a YouTube subscriber, VIVI45. Before we get to that, though, I want to thank everybody that helps get these out, everybody that helps promote this work. Constitutional Grassroots Movements, Restore the Intent, Conversation on the Culture, Rebel North, who allows me to use their music, everybody that's sharing these things, the people I've met at some of these conferences. We have a great time. Dustin, you know, we met up in Nashville. I still want to talk to you. We have really some good stuff to cover. Kim's going to help me out at one of my upcoming conferences. Thank you very much. I love this. I love when you guys participate, and I love meeting you face to face. So if you head over to the website, you can see where I'm speaking, where I'm presenting, where I'm going to be. If you are there, please say hello. I'd love to meet you in person. If you'd like me to come to one of your events, by all means, hit the request to speak or give me some details. I'll do what I can to come out and speak to your group, speak to you, work on whatever you've got. I love spreading this word. As always, I'm going to ask you, especially since I'm answering a viewer question today, in the comments, put in a question, something you think, especially about how we developed this whole thing. But I'm looking for questions that I can answer for people online. And if you want to do it on video, make a note of that. I'll be more than happy to set up an online interaction so that we can record and actually have this discussion face to face via the internet. So again, this came from Vivi45. So I'm guessing I'm going to pronounce it that way because, well, I have no other way of doing it. But I said, I love this question, not simply because it was a good question, which it was. It was a very good question. But it was asked in such a great way. It was considered, it was deliberative, it was polite. This was a wonderful question, and I was thrilled to get the chance to answer this. So Vivi45 asked on the YouTube channel, and I don't know if it's a he or a she, but they asked, I understand... Let me put that up there. I understand that when a perceived right infringes on another, such as forcing someone to teach me or provide me with health care, then it's not a right. What about driving? Is that a right or a privilege? In that instance, I'm not forcing anyone to do anything for me. Now again, Vivi45's question, it was great because she set up the premise. It dealt with something I discussed before, and that is the understanding what a right is and properly exercising. When can you legitimately exercise certain rights? A right can't be properly exercised if it infringes on the legitimate right of someone else. And I've used this example of education and healthcare before, which is where that all comes from, and how, a right to healthcare or a right to education forces others to work for your benefit. And, based on this premise, Vivi45 asked the question, what about driving? The act of driving does not force anyone to do something for me to make that happen. Then Vivi45 brings up an interesting point. You could make the point that roads, you can make the point about roads, but that should be either privatized or funded from a purchase of fuel. Then only drivers are paying for roads. And the roads are an interesting question, but we're going to talk more about that later. Finally, Vivi45 goes on and states, I don't think driving should be considered a privilege. I think it's a right. What are your thoughts? Again, all in all, good, solid, well-supported, well-framed, well-qualified question. I love it. Vivi45, you get kudos for not only asking a good question, but asking it well. Now, What was my reply? Well, since a right is defined as a just immunity or privilege, I would rephrase your question about driving to, is it an alienable right? So let's think about this for a minute. And that's where I kind of got started. It's understanding that a right is a just immunity or privilege, a just claim immunity or privilege, if I want to be specific. Therefore, the distinction between a right and a privilege is a little fuzzy if you're not careful about that. So once I kind of set that off, I went on to say, if you buy a car, you own that car, it is your property, and you have a right to do with it whatever you wish, as long as you don't infringe on the legitimate right of another. So you can drive your car on your property, but you do not have the right to drive on someone else's property. So I start with Vivi 45, and I agree. You own your car. You have the right to do with it whatever you want. It's your property. However, we then get to the issue of roads. See, we call them public roads, but really they're owned by the government, not the public. Since the roads are owned by the government, then they can determine who, when, and under what conditions someone can use them. Again, we have a property rights issue. If you don't own the roads, who does? Because he who owns the road can determine who, when, how, and under what circumstances it can be used. Continuing, although we don't act that way, technically we own the government, state, local, and federal, since we the people are ultimately sovereign in this nation. So we should be telling the government who, when, and under what conditions someone can use property owned by them. Sadly, we have given governments, mostly through our inaction, a virtual monopoly not only over our roadways, but the authority to determine qualifications for using them. That means that they not only exercise power over government-owned roads, but private ones as well. Ultimately, that is our fault for letting it happen. See, we get into this whole question of who oversees the government. Are they responsible to us, or are we responsible to them? And since we have given them the power to purchase land and build roads, they own the roads, but we're back to that. We haven't kept up with our responsibility to oversee them. It's continuing on. Whoops, I seem to have there we go. Sorry about that, get the right quote up. Okay, so I would have an inalienable right to purchase a vehicle and use it wherever you like, as long as you have permission of the owner of the land. Since you do not own public roads, your right to use them is alienable. If governments own the public roads, they have to set the standards for their use. They also are bound to the Constitution, meaning those rules are to apply to everyone equally, and your right to use public land cannot be revoked without due process of law, the protection of your rights. If we do not like the way one of our governments is discharging their duties over our roadways, it is up to us to elect representatives that will do a better job. Okay, so driving is a right, but your right to use public roads is alienable. Driving is really a property right. It's the use of your property, the car, how you see fit. But that does not grant you the right to use public roads. Of course, since the governments are bound to the constitutions, they're governed by those documents. And ultimately, the responsibility for what those governments do rests with the American people. Continuing on, personally, I would like to see the government monopoly over driver qualification and roadways broken up, but I don't see that happening, at least not until we get control of our governments in the first place. You see, the question, if government doesn't own it, who will, often comes up. See, there are many ways of licensing of drivers and building and maintenance of roads can be done outside of government control. Viv 45 brings up a couple possibilities. You could privatize the road. I'm originally from upstate New York. We had the New York State Thruway, which is a privately owned road. It comes under a lot of government control and regulation, but it's funded by tolls. You could also have them funded by fees and taxes on gasoline, But we're back in the question, if it's taxes on gasoline and the government's collecting the taxes and the government's building the road, we're back into the same place. It's a catch-22. So yeah, would these ways be better? Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. I'd love to see some states try it. Because one of the great things about living in a union of sovereign states, states can try different things and we can all learn from them. Well, Viv 45 wasn't done. There was more to this question. And she asked back, she goes, I like your train of thought. You mentioned that we call them public roads, but really they're owned by the government, not the public. For my part, I don't think the government could own anything. As you pointed out, the government is owned by the people. And anything the government gets, it gets from the people. So how does government own anything? Furthermore, if roads are paid for with tax dollars, the people's money, doesn't that mean the people and not the government owns the road? And if we are right, the people own the road and own the car, doesn't that make driving a right? This was, again, I'm praising Viv 45 because it was well asked, but they bring up some very interesting points. And they're actually points I want to deal with in my quote, but I will tell you, flattery does get my attention. I'm only human, so when they said they liked the way I said this, I appreciate that, but it's a well-formed follow-up. And I love this type of discussion because it's thoughtful. It's a back and forth discussion, and it opens up new ideas. It made me reinforce and investigate the argument about government ownership. It's one of the reasons why I think studying Constitution in small groups is so beneficial, because it makes you deal with those interactions. See, we started talking out about driving, and now we're talking about ownership of public property. Isn't that interesting? One question led us to another whole area, another whole idea. So Viv 45 then goes down a different topic regarding the penalties for not following the rules, but I don't want to include too much personal information here. I do want to discuss the focus of this property ownership question. So let's see. Here we go. Yes, governments can own things. Just go to any government office and look at the more expensive items like computers and furniture, and you'll find an asset tag that says property of. And it's real simple to see that governments own things. But here's where life got real interesting. And this is where Viv 45's question made me really open up and explain some ideas that may have been percolating around, but I hadn't really fully formed. You see, a government is just an organization. It's not that different from a corporation. We form corporations to manufacture products and provide goods and services. We form governments to protect our rights and perform functions we think would be inappropriate or inefficient to do individually. We don't think it's appropriate for individuals to create laws for themselves, then enforce and prosecute them. So we form a government to do it for us. Corporations have their own money and can engage in commerce, and governments have their own assets and can purchase things. Yes, they got the money from us, but we agreed to give them the power to take that money from us. Just as a corporation is made up of people but are a separate entity, governments are also made up of people but are a separate entity. Just as corporations have owners, either directly or as stockholders, governments have owners and the people who created them. And just as when the oversight of a corporation is lax, it runs amok, so when we do not oversee our governments, they also run rampant. So just as when a corporation builds a building, it is owned by the corporation and not the individual stockholders. When the government builds a road, it's not the individual taxpayers own the road. It's the government, not the individual taxpayers, that own the road. Sorry, I got that wrong. Since you don't directly own the road, you don't have the right to use it as you see fit. Rights are individual, not collective. So even if you view the road as purchased collectively, you do not have a right to it, since that collection is organized under a contract, a constitution, or charter, or some other forming document. And I really need to explain this because I realized as I went back, it got a little weird. Rights are individual, but I don't just mean individual people. In other words, a right belongs to an individual entity. You don't have this idea of a collective right is we the people own it, so we the people can use it. Doesn't ever work. But when you create an entity, when you get together and create an entity that owns it, that entity has rights, and that entity is organized under a contract, something like a constitution or a charter or something that sets the rules by which that entity works. Now, kind of going back, this is one of the more interesting ideas that came up as I was writing my book, The Constitution Study, and that's the idea that governments really aren't all that special. They aren't some magical think tank. They didn't just pop out of the earth. They're a creation. And they certainly are not infallible. They are created by people, and they are endowed by people. It's, we think about, the Declaration says we are all endowed by our Creator. The government doesn't endow us with these rights. Our Creator did, and we created the government. But the government really is just an organization. Whether you think of it as a corporation or more like the Rotary Club, it's people. It's people with their mistakes, their foibles, their failures. It's created by people, and it's made up of people. So when we talk about government doing something, it's really just people acting as part of this organization. The only real difference between a government and a corporation or a social group is the fact you are both a shareholder of some government, whether you want it or not. And so you're born a shareholder. You don't go out, you go out and buy shares of IBM or Apple. You don't go out and buy shares of New York State or Tennessee or the United States. The odd thing is you're either born into it or you join it by becoming a citizen. See, this idea that governments aren't some special magical thing helps kind of, at least me, understand some of what the Founding Fathers were talking about. So with this premise in mind, not only does the idea of government ownership make more sense, but our responsibility as the owners of the government really becomes clear. And this also may help you understand some more of my response to Viv 45's question about traffic laws. The issue of traffic fines is a question of justice. What is the just penalty for using something in a way the owner forbids? What is the responsibility of the person who violated the rules established by the owner? A good way to look at this is to put yourself in the other's shoes. Imagine you have a long driveway that connects one road to another, and you require people who drive on your driveway to prove they have the skills and training necessary to operate the vehicle, in other words, a license, and to drive no more than 15 miles per hour because you're concerned about the safety of others on your property. How would you punish someone who violated the speed limit? Would you vary the punishment based on how fast they were going? If they continued to ignore your rule, would you revoke their permission to use your driveway? And what if they continued to drive on your driveway even after your permission had been revoked? See, now the idea of laws and their proper function as punishment for bad acting, I think makes a lot more sense. Now, if you think the fines and punishment the state imposes on violating the rules they have established to use their roads is excessive, then you should go to the person you and your neighbors hire to represent you in the state government for a redress of your grievance. I think you'll encourage more cooperation with a calm, reasoned, logical argument based on facts and evidence than a claim that these fines are a violation of a person's right to drive, since any such right to drive on government roads is an inalienable right granted by said government. So I really think Vivi 45 could make a very good reasoned argument to an elected official about excessive fines or unreasonable fines. But we've come full circle, haven't we? See, one of the problems with the idea that everyone owns public property is that effectively, as I said, nobody does. We all assume someone else will take care of it. So we create organizations to do this work. We call them governments or homeowners associations or not-for-profit corporations. they are all still ways for us to collectively manage and maintain property. And if we put ourselves in the position of an organization, we may get a better point of view on why they do what they do. Maybe if we did so more often, we would not take our responsibility of overseeing our representatives so lightly. We would not treat them like some oligarchy that rules over us, but realize that they're our responsibility to manage and maintain. So I hope this look at Vivi 45's comments and questions, I hope you took the discussion and found it interesting. We talked about driving rights and public ownership, but I also hope you'll take this and think a little more deeply about other constitutional questions when they come up. As always, if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. Let me know if you'd like me to join Twitter. I'm not currently doing anything with it, but I'd consider doing it. Always head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com, and we can you can ask questions there, post comments there. This to me was a great example of a question. It was well formed. It was well thought. It was well argued. I think it was really well done. It was a very good example for everyone to follow. Most importantly, it showed me somebody thinking about a problem and then being open to listening to other ideas and then going to see if they were true. So this is rather a long ponder this episode, but I thought it was really worth it, not only to show what a really good question looks like, but this idea of driving rights and really about public ownership, I think are a really important understanding how our governments are designed to work. So I hope I didn't wear you out. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll ask some questions, post some comments. Most of all, I hope to see you again the next time on the Constitution Study. Have a great day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a